We're out and about. I'm Joseph. This is Input English. Out and about, that's a common expression. You hear it all the time. Out, of course, means not in. So out of the house, out of the usual location. And about in this phrase refers to around. So if you are out of the house and ranging to different places, you can say that you are out and about. And that's what we're doing today. I'm out and about. Specifically, I'm in an unusual place. I'm on Mount Hamilton. It takes me about an hour and a half to get here, not because I want to drive slowly, but because the roads create an atmosphere where driving slowly is the only reasonable choice. The road here has a lot of switchbacks. That is, the road goes in a particular direction and then it reverses and goes back on itself, winding its way up the mountain. I started down close to sea level, and now I'm up at 4,265 feet above sea level. So we did a lot of climbing on that road with switchbacks. The other term that's similar that you will hear from time to time is hairpin turns. You may be familiar with hairpins. I usually associate hairpins with ladies controlling their hair, and they're usually made out of spring steel, and they're perhaps a little over an inch long. The shape is that two sides are parallel, but they are one piece that loops back on itself. And so a hairpin turn describes how the road loops back on itself. So there were a lot of switchbacks, a lot of hairpin turns, and my speed coming up here was limited to about 25 miles an hour for the last 20 miles. So it took a long time to get here. When I started at the house, it looked very much like this. That is, the sky was clear, visibility was fabulous, and there was fog down in the valley. I then drove down into San Jose and wound up in a cloud. I wound up under a cloud, and we would call that overcast. As you look up in an overcast, all you see is clouds. As the road came up this mountain, I drove through the cloud and out the top of the cloud. So we're now above the clouds. Behind me, you can see San Jose, however, it is enshrouded in clouds. We're above the clouds. I'm going to turn around. I'm standing in front of the main building at the Lick Observatory. You can see it right there. This location appears to be a magnet for young people who are enthusiasts for automobiles and motorcycles. So there is a large collection of people here, all young men, all focused on their car or their motorcycle. Given that, I'm going to hike around this building, get away from this parking lot that appears to be a magnet, and explore some of the locations of this observatory on a mountaintop. I've walked around the end of the building, and it got a lot quieter. There's a lot to this facility. It is run by the Regents of California. That is, the University of California Regents have responsibility for managing this facility. It has a very long history. This observatory is named after James Lick, and he funded the original construction of this observatory. As I recall, the original funding was about $700,000, which in modern currency would be about $24 million. He had an understanding with the county government so that they would, for their part, build a satisfactory road up to this location. This observatory has a long history. As I recall, it was built in the 1870s. This observatory and the 12-inch refractor telescope was credited with discovering the fifth moon orbiting Jupiter. Later, observations at this observatory complex confirmed the existence of the 6th, 7th, and 8th moons of Jupiter. Over the years, they've built a number of other observatory buildings here, and they have buildings that are for dormitory purposes. It was recognized that people would need to stay here because traveling from here to a different location would be impractical given the slow travel on this road. So I'm standing next to dormitory number 1, which is an old building. Behind me is the main building with its characteristic 2 domes. This building was subjected to quite a trauma. In about 1939, a military aircraft, an A-13 bomber, flew into this building. There were 2 people in the building, neither of whom were injured, but there were 2 people in the aircraft, both of whom died instantly on impact. Luckily, there was no fire, and the building was repaired. As I turn around, you get a nice view of the valley below us. This is the side of the building that fewer people visit. Most people go straight to the front of the building, but luckily we were driven away by the throngs of people admiring their cars and motorcycles. They were also talking quite loudly, and so I found myself back here. So here we have a plaque that explains what's going on here. This is building 1. There is an arched doorway, and at the top of that doorway, it is labeled 1875. James Lick is buried under this telescope. This larger dome contains the 36-inch telescope. That is 36 inches in diameter, and he is buried underneath that. There is a bronze plaque that commemorates his life, his passing, and his grave under this building. There's a dome that you can see in the middle of this view that houses the Krashen 36-inch reflector telescope. This dates back to the end of the 19th century. It provided a lot more light collecting capacity compared to the 12-inch telescope in building 1. Over on this side of the observatory, there are benches, and then there are signs like this that point out in photographs the various landmarks. Now, as I looked at this particular picture and strived to identify familiar locations, I realized they were all enshrouded in cloud cover. All the clouds are below us, and none of the ground features in the San Jose area are visible. There's a mountain ridge behind me here, and that includes Mount Umunhum. And Mount Umunhum was a place I visited in a previous video. It was a site where the Air Force had an early warning radar facility that became obsolete as technology improved. So the Air Force radar facility was turned over to the county, and it's now a county park. When you visit a place like this, it's common to come upon signs like this that explain the history and the significance of the various buildings and people associated with these buildings. This place has quite a history. I'm now just walking on the facility. There's not much traffic here. I'm walking up toward the 200-inch telescope observatory that was built later. When the Lick Observatory was first built in the last quarter of the 19th century, light pollution in this valley was not an issue. San Jose was very small, very agricultural, and there were not many lights at night. Owing to this, the sky was very dark, and this was an ideal place to observe the sky. As San Jose has become very heavily populated, the development of electric lights has been fairly dramatic over the past 100 years. So now light pollution is a very real issue for observatories like this one. It was a severe enough problem that there were discussions about moving this facility to a location with a darker sky, with less light pollution. Unfortunately, the cost of doing that was astronomical, and so far it has not been initiated. Behind me there is a dome, and this is the location of the automated planet finder. This part of the facility is dedicated toward identifying exoplanets. So I've walked around the automated planet finder, and as I turn, you can see a very big dome. This is the location of the Krashen telescope. It's a 200-inch reflector telescope. This is a very quiet location. The only sound that I pick up that I attribute to human activity is the sound of an air conditioner busily cooling down these observatories. The buildings in this area are older, and they are residential in nature. I saw a sign on one of the buildings that stated, "Day sleepers, please be quiet." Makes sense. If someone spends their entire night observing using these facilities, they would need to find a time in the daytime to sleep. And if a bunch of visitors came and made a lot of noise, it would really interfere with their mission. So I'm now inside this Krashen telescope observatory building. It had a sign that indicated that the visitors gallery was open after 10 o'clock in the morning. So I checked the time on my cell phone, and indeed it is just after 10 o'clock on the weekend. So I tried the door. I expected it to be locked, but indeed it was not locked. It was open, and I walked right in here. And so this is a visitors gallery that talks about this facility. People can come here during the day and take a look. So here's a poster that explains how this facility contributes to this complex of observatories. Here we see the 200-inch telescope. There's no one here, nothing is happening this time of day, but this visitors gallery gives us an opportunity to take a look at this beast. That was a very pleasant surprise. I did not expect to be able to walk in and take a look at their big telescope. Inside this observers area, there was a plaque on the wall, and it was the 50-year commemoration of science conducted here. As you may recall, astronauts from the US were launched in 1969 from Cape Canaveral, and they traveled to the moon and landed. This was Apollo 11. This was Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin who landed on the moon. One of the things that they did while they were on the moon is place a scientific device on the surface of the moon. This device was called the retroreflector. I can remember hearing that term and thinking it kind of odd because a reflector causes the light to go in a retro direction, so it seemed like a redundant term. But the NASA term for that device they placed on the surface of the moon was the retroreflector. After that device was placed, astronomers from this facility fired a gigawatt laser beam at the moon, and then it reflected back to the telescope here. They were able to make very precise measurements of the distance between here and the moon within a centimeter or so. The most precise measurements of the distance of the moon up until that point were made from this facility. Mount Hamilton is part of the Diablo mountain range, which stretches along the East Bay, and it's an important habitat to a lot of different kinds of animals. Golden eagles nest on Mount Hamilton. There was a sign nearby here that explains that one needs to be aware of and cautious about rattlesnakes because they are part of this ecosystem, an important part, and they should be left alone. Well, this was demonstrated to me because when I was driving up here, I came to a place in the road where I saw a snake, but the snake wasn't moving. And that's pretty bad news, actually, from the snake's point of view. So I found a place to pull over to take a look. I was curious. From the point of view of the driver's seat, that snake appeared to be a rattlesnake. It had the right shape and size, so I suspected that it was a rattlesnake, and I suspected that it had been killed by a car. This was confirmed. Now, I didn't take a photograph of the head of the snake because it was pretty misshapen owing to the fatal injury it received, no doubt, by the tire of a car. But the rattle was very much intact, so I present you with the picture of the rattle on the end of a rattlesnake. This location gives you a very good look at this 200-inch telescope observatory, the Krashen telescope. This was the one we saw from inside the viewing area, the visitors gallery. I'm particularly taken by this building for one simple reason. It has a drinking fountain. It's hot and dry up here, and it has a drinking fountain. I need to correct an error rather than delete the entire video and start over. Let me just correct one thing. This is a 120-inch telescope that is 10 feet in diameter, not 200 inches. I was mistaken. This is 120 inches. It's still a very big telescope. Here you can see the main complex with the main building. This is the walk back from the Krashen telescope. As I've been walking around here, the valley has warmed up. It's already quite warm up here, but the valley is warming up and the fog and clouds are burning off. So now, in contrast to when we arrived, one can see a lot of the South Bay, the south end of San Jose, no longer enshrouded in fog. The overcast is burning off. I think we have a temperature inversion here. Usually when one travels from sea level up to altitude, for instance, a mountaintop, it gets cooler as one goes up. There is a typical lapse rate, that is, there is a typical rate of cooling as one goes to higher altitudes. That's the normal conditions. However, sometimes one will encounter a temperature inversion and find warmer air above the cooler air. And that's what we have here today. We had a temperature inversion. The cool air was in the valley, and that's why we had the fog. And then the warmer air was up here at the mountaintop, and it was quite a bit warmer here. I was watching the temperature as I drove up the mountain, And the further up the mountain I went, the warmer it got. So we have returned to the main building at the Lick Observatory. It's a beautiful day here in San Jose. I invite comments below, and if you like videos like this, be sure to click on this one next. See you soon.